Have you ever noticed how the more you chase someone, the more they pull away, but the moment you step back, they start coming closer? It's confusing. It feels like a game, but it's not a game, it's psychology. Because when you're dealing with someone who has avoidant tendencies, what attracts them isn't intensity, it's emotional space, certainty, and mystery. And here's the truth most people never realize. You don't attract them by doing more. You attract them by becoming more. Today, I'm going to show you exactly why the way you act keeps them hooked and why they don't even understand it themselves. There's something deeply powerful about a person who knows who they are and doesn't need constant reassurance to feel whole. When you carry that kind of certainty within you, it changes the entire dynamic of how others experience you, especially someone with avoidant tendencies. They may not consciously understand it, but they feel it immediately. It's like walking into a room where everything is calm, grounded, and steady. There's no pressure, no emotional chaos, no hidden demand for validation. And that kind of presence is rare. Most people think attraction is about saying the right things, texting at the perfect time, or showing how much they care. But what they miss is this. Energy always speaks first. If your energy is uncertain, if you're constantly questioning yourself, wondering where you stand, or seeking approval, that creates a subtle pressure. And for someone who values emotional distance, that pressure feels overwhelming. Their instinct isn't to lean in, it's to pull away. But when you are certain within yourself, everything shifts. Certainty doesn't mean you have all the answers. It doesn't mean you're perfect or that you never feel doubt. It means that at your core, you trust yourself. You trust your value. You don't need someone else to constantly confirm that you're enough. And that internal stability creates a sense of emotional safety that avoidants are quietly drawn to. Think about it, someone who is avoidant is often used to people chasing them, seeking their attention, trying to prove their worth. That pattern becomes predictable, and predictability in that form feels like pressure. But when you show up differently, when you're calm, composed, and not trying to force anything, you break that pattern. Suddenly they don't know how to read you in the same way. And that uncertainty sparks curiosity. Your certainty shows up in the way you speak, in the way you move, in the way you respond or don't respond. You're not rushing to fill silence. You're not over-explaining yourself. You're not trying to control how they see you. Instead, you allow things to unfold naturally. And that creates a powerful shift. Instead of you chasing their attention, they start leaning in to understand you. There's also a deeper layer to this. Certainty communicates emotional strength. It tells the other person without words that you are not fragile, that you won't collapse if they pull away for a moment. And for someone who fears emotional closeness, this is incredibly important. Because one of their biggest fears is being responsible for someone else's emotional state. When they sense that you are stable, that you can hold your own emotional ground, it reduces that fear. It gives them room to engage without feeling trapped. But here's where most people get it wrong. They try to fake certainty. They pretend not to care, they act distant, they suppress their feelings, and that's not the same thing. Real certainty isn't about pretending, it's about alignment. It's about genuinely being okay with yourself, whether someone chooses you or not. It's about knowing that your worth isn't on the line in every interaction. When you reach that place, your behavior becomes effortless. You don't have to think about playing it cool or saying the perfect thing. You just are. And that authenticity is what makes certainty so magnetic. It's not forced, it's felt. And here's the truth that changes everything. When you stop trying to be chosen, you become the one who is choosing. That shift in mindset is powerful. It moves you out of a position of need and into a position of strength. You're no longer asking, do they like me? You're asking, do they align with me? And that question alone changes your energy completely. Avoidants may not be able to explain why they feel drawn to you when you operate from certainty. They might even feel confused by it. But what they're responding to is your grounded presence, your emotional independence, and your lack of neediness. It's something they don't encounter often, and that makes it stand out. So the real work isn't in trying to figure them out. It's in strengthening your own foundation. Because the more certain you become within yourself, the less you need to chase anything, and the more naturally people, even the most emotionally distant ones, begin to feel pulled toward you. There's a moment in every connection where the dynamic quietly shifts. At first, it might feel exciting, intense, full of possibility. You give attention, you invest energy, you show interest. But then something subtle happens, start to lean a little more on their responses to feel good. Their texts lift your mood, their silence lowers it. And without realizing it, your emotional state begins to depend on them. That's the moment attraction starts to weaken, especially for someone with avoidant tendencies. Because avoidants are highly sensitive to emotional pressure, even when it's unspoken. The moment they sense that someone's happiness is tied to them, it creates an internal resistance. Not because they don't care, but because it feels like a responsibility they didn't ask for. And instead of moving closer, their instinct is to create space. But when you are emotionally independent, you break that pattern completely. Emotional independence means your happiness, your sense of worth, your inner peace, none of it is controlled by someone else's behavior. You enjoy their presence, but you don't rely on it. You appreciate their attention, but you don't need it to feel complete. And that distinction changes everything. When you operate from this place, your energy becomes lighter. There's no hidden expectation behind your actions. You're not giving in order to get something back. You're simply expressing who you are. And that lack of pressure is incredibly attractive, especially to someone who is used to feeling overwhelmed by emotional demands. Think about how rare that is. Most people, without realizing it, are constantly seeking validation. They want reassurance, consistency, proof that they matter. And while that's a natural human desire, when it becomes dependency, it creates tension. It turns connection into obligation. But emotional independence removes that tension entirely. You're no longer reacting to every small change. If they take time to respond, you don't spiral into overthinking. If they pull back slightly, you don't chase to restore balance. You stay grounded. You stay centered. And that stability makes you stand out in a way that words never could. There's also a powerful psychological effect at play here. When someone realizes that they are not the source of your happiness, they start to wonder what is. They become curious about your life, your mindset, your world. Because instead of being the center of your universe, they are a part of it. And people are naturally drawn to what they don't fully control. This doesn't mean you become distant or cold. Emotional independence is not about shutting down your feelings or pretending you don't care. It's about caring without losing yourself. It's about being fully present in the connection while still maintaining your own identity, your own priorities, your own sense of direction. You still express interest, you still show warmth, but there's a difference in how it feels. It's not coming from a place of night, it's coming from a place of choice. And that makes your attention more valuable. Because it's not something you're giving out of emptiness, it's something you're sharing from fullness. Avoidance, even if they don't consciously recognize it, feels safe around this kind of energy. There's no pressure to perform, no expectation they have to constantly meet. They can engage at their own pace without feeling like they're being pulled into something too intense. And ironically, that freedom often makes them more willing to come closer. But here's where it becomes even more important. Emotional independence protects you just as much as it attracts them. When you are not dependent on someone else for your emotional state, you don't tolerate behavior that doesn't align with your values. You don't stay in situations that drain you. You don't chase clarity from someone who isn't offering it. You remain in control of your own experience. And that creates a powerful shift in the dynamic. You are no longer trying to win them over. You are observing, choosing, deciding whether this connection adds to your life. That mindset naturally raises your standards, and those standards shape your behavior in ways that increase your attractiveness without you even trying. The truth is, people feel most drawn to those who are already fulfilled, not because they don't need anyone, but because they don't need anyone to complete them. There's a difference. One is isolation, the other is strength. And when you embody that strength, something remarkable happens. The energy of the interaction changes from "I hope they stay" to "I'm okay either way." That calm confidence is what creates real attraction. It removes pressure, builds curiosity, and allows the connection to develop naturally. So instead of focusing on how to keep someone interested, the real question becomes, how do you build a life and an identity that you're deeply connected to, independent of anyone else? Because when you do that, you stop chasing attention and you start attracting it. One of the most misunderstood ideas in human connection is space. Most people here give them space and interpret it as pulling away, becoming distant, or playing some kind of emotional game. But real space isn't about strategy, it's about restraint, self-control, and understanding that not everything needs to be filled, explained, or chased. And when it comes to someone with avoidant tendencies, space isn't just helpful, it's essential. There's a natural impulse when you like someone to move closer, to communicate more, to share more, to make your presence felt. You want clarity, connection, and momentum. But when you overdo that, when you text too often, explain too much, or try to keep the interaction constantly alive, you remove something powerful, the unknown. And without the unknown, curiosity fades. Curiosity thrives in absence, in pauses, in moments where the mind has room to wander. When everything is always available, always explained, always predictable, there's nothing left to explore. But when you allow space, real grounded, non-anxious space, you create openings where curiosity can grow naturally. For someone who leans avoidant, this effect is even stronger. Their instinct is to protect their independence, to maintain emotional distance when things feel too intense or too close. So when they sense constant engagement, even if it's well-intentioned, it can feel overwhelming. They don't always understand why they feel the need to step back, they just do. And the more pressure they feel, the more they withdraw. But when you shift your behavior, when you stop filling every silence, stop initiating every conversation, stop trying to control the flow, you create a different kind of experience. You show them, without saying a word, that you are comfortable with space, that you don't need constant reassurance, that your world doesn't revolve around their attention. And that alone changes how they perceive you. Space creates contrast. It allows your presence to be felt because it's not constant. Think about anything valuable in life, it's not always available on demand. There's a rhythm to it, a natural ebb and flow. When you bring that same rhythm into your interactions, you become more intriguing without trying to be. Yeah. And here's the key, this only works when the space is genuine. If you're pulling back while internally overthinking, checking your phone, waiting for a response, that energy still exists. It still leaks into your behavior. Real space comes from being engaged in your own life. It comes from having your own priorities, your own focus, your own sense of direction that doesn't depend on the interaction continuing every moment. When you're living like that, you're not giving space as a tactic, you're simply not overextending yourself. You respond when it feels natural. You engage when you want to. And you step back when you have other things to do. There's no force behind it, no hidden agenda. And that authenticity is what makes it powerful. For the avoidant mind, this kind of space does something interesting. It removes the feeling of being pursued, which lowers their defenses. And once those defenses drop, curiosity starts to take over. They begin to wonder what you're doing, what you're thinking, why you're not as predictable as others. Not because you're trying to create mystery, but because you're not overexposing everything. This is where many people make a mistake. They think mystery means being vague or playing hard to get. But true mystery is simply not revealing everything all at once. It's allowing layers of your personality, your life, and your thoughts to unfold over time. And that can only happen when there is space between interactions. Space also allows emotions to breathe. When every moment is filled with communication, there's no time to process, no time to reflect, no time for anticipation to build. But when there are pauses, those emotional experiences have time to settle and deepen. And that depth is what creates lasting attraction. At the same time, space protects your own sense of balance. It keeps you from becoming overly invested too quickly. It gives you perspective. It allows you to observe the connection instead of being consumed by it. And that grounded position is where your best decisions come from. So instead of trying to maintain constant closeness, consider the power of stepping back not as a withdrawal, but as a form of confidence. You're not afraid of silence. You're not afraid of distance. You trust that what is meant to develop will do so without force. And when you operate like that, something shifts. The interaction no longer feels heavy or pressured. It feels open, natural, and alive. And in that space, curiosity grows, attraction deepens, and the other person often finds themselves thinking about you more not because you demanded their attention, but because you gave them the room to discover it on their own. Most people believe that communication's about words, what you say, how you say it, and when you say it. But the truth is, words are only a small part of the message you send. The real communication is happening underneath, in your energy, your emotional state, and the way you carry yourself. People may listen to your words, but they feel your energy. And when it comes to someone with avoidant tendencies, what they feel matters far more than anything you could ever explain. You can say all the right things, send thoughtful messages, and try to express your intentions clearly. But if your internal state is anxious, uncertain, or seeking validation, that energy comes through. It shows up in subtle ways in how quickly you respond and how much you explain and the tone behind your words. And even if they can't logically point it out, they sense it. That's what creates the push. Not necessarily what you said, but the emotional weight behind it. On the other hand, when your energy is calm, grounded, and self-assured, everything changes. You don't need to over-communicate because your presence already speaks. There's a steadiness in the way you engage. You're not trying to impress, you're not trying to convince, and you're not trying to control the outcome. You're simply being. And that kind of energy is rare, especially in a world where most interactions are driven by urgency and need. Avoidants are particularly sensitive to this difference. They are constantly scanning for pressure, even on a subconscious level. When they feel emotional intensity that seems overwhelming or unpredictable, their instinct is to create distance. But when they feel calm, stable energy, it lowers their guard. It tells them, without words, that this interaction is safe, that it won't demand more from them than they're ready to give. Think about how energy shows up in everyday behavior. If you're feeling anxious, you might check your phone repeatedly, reread messages, or overanalyze small details. You might respond too quickly or send extra messages to fill the silence. None of these actions are wrong on their own, but they carry a certain emotional tone. And that tone is what the other person responds to. Now imagine the opposite. You're centered, focused on your own life, and emotionally balanced. You're not rushing to reply because you're genuinely engaged in other things. When you do respond, it's intentional, not reactive. You're present in the interaction, but not consumed by it. That creates a completely different experience for the other person. It feels lighter, more natural, and far less demanding. There's also a level of authenticity that comes with stable energy. When you're not trying to manage how someone perceives you, you become more real. Your reactions are genuine, your expressions are honest, and your behavior aligns with how you actually feel. And that alignment is powerful. People trust what feels consistent. They are drawn to what feels real. What's interesting is that avoidants often struggle to articulate why they feel drawn to certain people and not others. They might say things like it just feels easy, where there's no pressure, without fully understanding what's creating that feeling. But what they're responding to is energy. They're responding to someone who isn't trying to force connection, someone who allows things to unfold naturally. This doesn't mean you suppress your emotions or pretend to be calm when you're not. It means you develop the ability to regulate your internal state. You become aware of what you're feeling without letting it control your behavior. If you feel anxious, you don't immediately act on it. You give yourself space to process it, to ground yourself, and then respond from a place of clarity instead of reaction. That level of self-regulation is what creates emotional strength. It allows you to stay consistent, regardless of external circumstances. And consistency is incredibly attractive because it creates predictability in the best way, not boring predictability, but emotional reliability. The other person knows they're not going to be pulled into chaos or intensity they can't handle. Your energy also sets the tone for the entire interaction. If you're calm, the interaction tends to stay calm. If you're playful, it becomes light and enjoyable. If you're intense or anxious, that intensity spreads. People naturally mirror the emotional state they're exposed to. So when you bring grounded, confident energy into the dynamic, it influences how the other person shows up as well. Over time, this becomes your silent advantage. You don't need to chase, convince, or over-explain. Your presence does the work. It creates comfort without pressure, interest without force, and connection without overwhelm. And for someone who is used to pulling away from intensity, that kind of experience stands out in a way they can't easily ignore. So instead of focusing on crafting the perfect message or saying the perfect thing, the real question becomes, what is the emotional state you are bringing into the interaction? Because that state is always being communicated, whether you realize it or not. And when you learn to master that, you don't just change how others respond to you, you change the entire dynamic of how connection unfolds. There's a common belief that if you make things easy, if you give more, if you're always available and agreeable, you'll naturally become more attractive. It sounds logical: be kind, be open, remove obstacles, and the connection should grow. But when it comes to human psychology, especially with someone who has avoidant tendencies, the opposite often creates a stronger pull. When everything is handed over without resistance, without standards, without any sense of effort required, it can quietly reduce the level of interest. This isn't about playing games or creating artificial difficulty. It's about understanding that value is often tied to effort and perception. When something feels too easy to obtain, the mind doesn't engage with it in the same way. There's no tension, no curiosity, no sense of earning or discovering. But when there's a natural level of challenge, when not everything is immediately given attention, increases. Focus sharpens, interest deepens. For someone with avoidant tendencies, this dynamic becomes even more pronounced. They are used to people leaning in quickly, offering everything up front, trying to secure connection as fast as possible. And while that might seem appealing at first, it quickly becomes overwhelming. It removes the space they need to feel comfortable, and it creates an unspoken expectation that they have to match that level of intensity. Instead of stepping forward, they often step back. But when you bring a sense of challenge, not through manipulation, but through self-respect and boundaries, you change the entire interaction. You're not instantly available at all times. You don't agree with everything just to keep the peace. You don't reveal every detail about yourself in the first few conversations. You allow the connection to build gradually, layer by layer. And in doing so, you create something that feels more engaging. Challenge in this context is really about having standards. It's about knowing what you value and not compromising it just to keep someone interested. When you do that, you naturally become less predictable. Not in a confusing way, but in a way that keeps the interaction alive. The other person can't assume they fully understand you right away. And that uncertainty creates curiosity. There's also a psychological principle at play here. People tend to invest more in what they work for. When someone has to put in efforts, whether it's time, attention, or emotional presence, they begin to value the connection more. Not because you demanded it, but because the process of earning it created a deeper level of engagement. If everything is given freely, with no requirement for effort, there's nothing to invest in. And without investment, there's very little attachment. When there's a balance, when both people are contributing, discovering, and gradually building something, the connection feels more meaningful. It's important to understand that challenge is not about withholding affection or being cold. It's not about testing the other person or trying to create insecurity. Those approaches come from a place of fear and often lead to unhealthy dynamics. Real challenge comes from being grounded in your own life. You have your own priorities, your own schedule, your own direction. You're not rearranging everything just to accommodate someone else. And that independence naturally creates a level of distance that feels intriguing. When you operate like this, your attention becomes more valuable. It's not something that's always available on demand. It's something that is shared intentionally. And because of that, it carries more weight. The other person begins to notice when you give your time, when you engage, when you open up. Those moments stand out because they're not constant. Avoidants, even if they don't consciously recognize it, respond to this dynamic. When there's no pressure and no overwhelming intensity, they feel more comfortable leaning in. And when they realize that your attention isn't guaranteed, it creates a subtle shift. They begin to move towards you, not because they're being chased, but because they're choosing to engage. There's also an internal shift that happens within you. When you stop trying to make everything easy for someone else, you start prioritizing your own experience. You become more selective, more aware of what you want, more willing to walk away from situations that don't meet your standards. And that mindset changes how you show up in every interaction. You're no longer trying to prove your worth. You're expressing it. You're not trying to convince someone to stay interested. You're allowing them the opportunity to step up and meet you at your level. And that subtle difference is what creates real attraction. In the end, challenge isn't something you create, it's something that naturally exists when you respect yourself enough not to give everything away too quickly. It's the balance between openness and restraint, between interest and independence. And when that balance is present, it creates a dynamic that feels engaging, alive, and worth investing in. So instead of asking how you can make things easier for someone else, consider how you can stay aligned with your own standards while allowing the connection to grow at its own pace. Because when there's something to discover, something to earn, and something to build, the connection doesn't just exist, it evolves. There is a quiet power in someone who respects themselves deeply, and it's not loud or performative. It doesn't need constant validation or external approval. It shows up in subtle, consistent ways in what you tolerate, in what you walk away from, in how you carry yourself when no one is watching. And when it comes to someone with avoidant tendencies, this kind of self-respect is one of the most compelling forces you can bring into the dynamic. Most people, when they feel a strong attraction or emotional pull, begin to compromise without even realizing it. They overlook small red flags, excuse inconsistent behavior, or lower their standards just to keep the connection alive. It often comes from a place of the fear of losing the person, the fear of not finding someone else, the fear of not being enough. But every time you abandon your own boundaries to maintain someone else's interests, something shifts internally. You begin to disconnect from yourself. And that disconnection doesn't go unnoticed. Even if the other person can't explain it, they feel the imbalance. When your actions say, "I'll accept anything just to keep you," it reduces the perceived value of the connection. Not because you lack worth, but because you're not demonstrating it through your behavior. Self-respect changes that completely. It means you are clear about what you value, what you expect, and what you are willing to accept, and you stay aligned with those standards regardless of the outcome. You don't bend just to avoid discomfort. You don't chase clarity from someone who isn't offering it. And you don't stay in situations that consistently leave you feeling uncertain or undervalued. This doesn't make you rigid or unapproachable. In fact, it does the opposite. It creates a sense of clarity and stability that others can feel. There's no confusion about where you stand or what you're willing to tolerate. And that clarity is deeply attractive because it removes ambiguity from the interaction. For someone with avoidant tendencies, this is especially impactful. They are often used to people overextending themselves, trying to prove their worth, or tolerating inconsistent behavior in hopes of gaining closeness. But when they encounter someone who calmly sets boundaries and follows through with them, it disrupts that pattern. It creates a different kind of experience, one where the connection is not driven by need but by mutual respect. There's also a level of unpredictability and self-respect that makes it compelling. Not in a chaotic sense, but in a grounded, principled way. You're not reacting emotionally to every situation. You're responding based on your values. And because those values are consistent, your behavior becomes reliable without being easily manipulated. One of the most powerful expressions of self-respect is the ability to walk away. Not as a tactic, not as a way to provoke a reaction, but as a genuine decision when something no longer aligns with you. That willingness sends a strong message. You value yourself enough not to stay where you are not being met. Avoidants often struggle with closeness, but they also recognize strength when they see it. When they sense that you are not dependent on them, that you are fully capable of choosing yourself, it creates a different kind of attraction. It's not based on pressure or intensity, it's based on respect and curiosity. At the same time, self-respect protects you from losing yourself in the process. It keeps you grounded in your own identity, your own goals, your own emotional well-being. You're not adjusting your entire life to fit someone else's availability or behavior. You're maintaining your direction regardless of what the other person does. This also changes how you experience rejection or distance. Instead of taking it personally or trying to fix it, you see it as information. If someone pulls away or fails to meet your standards, you don't chase, you reassess. You decide whether the connection is still worth your time and energy. And that shift in perspective keeps you in control of your own experience. Self-respect also influences the pace of the connection. You don't rush into emotional depth before trust is established. You don't give more than what has been earned. You allow things to unfold naturally while still being aware of your own boundaries. This creates a balanced dynamic where both people are contributing and engaging at a healthy level. What makes this so powerful is that it doesn't require you to say anything explicitly. You don't have to announce your standards or explain your boundaries in every situation. They are communicated through your actions, through what you accept, what you decline, and how you respond when something doesn't feel right. And over time, this creates a strong foundation not just for attraction, but for a healthy connection. Because attraction without respect is unstable. It may feel intense in the beginning, but it doesn't last. Respect, on the other hand, creates consistency. It builds trust. It allows the connection to grow in a way that is sustainable. So instead of focusing on how to keep someone interested, the real focus becomes how to stay aligned with yourself. Because when you respect yourself deeply, you naturally attract people who either rise to meet that standard or remove themselves from your life. And either outcome works in your favor. In the end, self-respect isn't just attractive, it's essential. It defines the quality of every connection you experience. When it's fully present, it creates a dynamic that feels grounded, balanced, and real, something that even the most emotionally distant person can't ignore.